The session started like every other one. 12 species seated around a table the size of a small stadium. Holographic banners floating above each delegation. The low hum of translation fields running in the background, turning 40 different languages into something everyone could almost understand. Counselor Veth of the Yadari sat in his usual place, third from the left, already bored. First speaker Olaun of the Treth Combine had his eyes on his datapad. The Sulhari delegation was arguing quietly among themselves about something no one else cared about. Ambassador Sarah Voss of Earth sat at the human table, hands folded, watching the room. She had been doing this for 11 years. She knew the rhythms of this chamber the way a musician knows a song they have played too many times. She knew when the Yadari were going to object before they opened their mouths. She knew which resolutions would pass and which would die in committee. She knew the exact moment in every session when Olaun stopped pretending to listen and started drafting his response before anyone had finished speaking. She knew this room completely. That was part of why she was leaving it. The session moved through its agenda. A border adjustment proposal from the Sulhari passed, with amendments. A trade quota review for the Outer Belt systems, tabled for the third consecutive cycle. A resolution condemning the Dravari for a resource extraction dispute that everyone agreed was wrong and no one was going to do anything about passed unanimously, which meant it meant nothing. Sarah voted on each item. She raised her hand when required. She submitted 2 small amendments to the trade review, both of which were accepted without debate, because they were reasonable, and no one was paying close enough attention to notice. They also quietly extended human logistics access in the Veth corridor for another 14 months. That was the last piece. The last thing she needed in place. She had been setting pieces in place for a long time. When the agenda reached its final item, routine adjournment, vote to confirm the next session's date, Sarah reached into the document case beside her chair. She removed a single folder. Thin. Gray. Nothing written on the outside. She stood, walked to the center of the table, where the shared document terminal sat, and placed the folder down. She did not speak. She walked back to her seat, picked up her bag, and headed for the door. Behind her, the room kept going for exactly 4 seconds. That was how long it took for Counselor Veth's aide to pick up the folder and open it. 4 seconds of normal. Then the aide read the first line, and the normal ended. Ambassador Voss. She did not stop. Ambassador. She pushed through the chamber door. The folder contained 17 pages. Most of it was legal language withdrawal protocols, notification timelines, transfer of outstanding obligations. The kind of document that a team of lawyers produces when they have been given a very long time and very clear instructions. The language was precise. It was also, underneath all the formal phrasing, very simple. Humanity was leaving the Galactic Council, effective in 30 days. There were no demands inside the folder, no list of grievances, no conditions for return, no invitation to negotiate, no suggestion that the right offer might change anything. Just the notification, the date, and the signatures. Sarah Voss. Udo Marsh, Secretary General of the Human Diplomatic Corps. President Adaiz Nwosu of the Terran Assembly. 3 signatures. 30 days. That was it. In the chamber behind her, the session did not adjourn. It collapsed. Veth was on his feet. The Sulhari delegation had stopped arguing with each other and started arguing with everyone else. Translation fields were bleeding over each other, turning the room into a wall of overlapping sound. Olaun sat still in his chair and read the document a second time. Then a third. He was looking for the part that explained what had happened. There was no such part. Sarah walked down the corridor outside the chamber. The corridor was long and wide, built for species larger than humans, the ceiling high enough to make her feel small. She had walked it thousands of times. She noticed, for perhaps the first time, that she did not like it. Too large, too deliberate. Everything in this building had been built to make visitors feel the weight of the institution they were entering. She had stopped feeling it years ago. Her aide, a young man named Preet, fell into step beside her. He did not ask any questions. He had known for 3 months. He handed her a coffee instead, something he had picked up from the small vendor cart near the entrance. the only human-run thing in the entire building. A cart that Preet had set up himself 2 years ago, quietly, because he was tired of the council's version of coffee, which tasted like hot gray water. Sarah took it, drank, kept walking. Behind them, through the thick chamber walls, they could hear voices rising. "They'll send someone tonight," Preet said. "Tomorrow morning," Sarah said. "They'll argue tonight. Someone will want to send a delegation immediately, and someone else will say that shows weakness, and they'll go around the table twice before they agree on anything. Tomorrow morning, before 9. Preet considered this. Veth or Olaun? Veth. She finished the coffee. Olaun will want to read the document again first. They reached the building's main exit. Outside, the sky above the council station was the color it always was, a processed pale blue, pumped through atmospheric regulators that kept everything stable and temperate and exactly the same as it had been for the last 200 years. Nothing too hot, nothing too cold, nothing too surprising. Humanity's shuttle was waiting on the platform. Sarah stopped for a moment at the top of the steps. Not for drama. Just because her back hurt from the chair it always hurt. The council chairs were built for Yadari's spinal structure, and no one had ever fixed that, and she wanted a second before the shuttle ride. Preet stood beside her. 11 years, he said. Not a question, just noting it. 11 years, she said. She went down the steps. The shuttle door opened. She got in, sat down, and looked out the window as the platform slid away behind them. The council building grew smaller, then smaller. Then it was just a shape against the manufactured sky. She pulled out her data pad, opened a message from Hana Yun, time-stamped 2 hours ago. Final corridor checks complete. Everything holds. You're clear. Sarah closed the message. In the chamber she had just left, Counselor Veth read the last line of the notice of diplomatic withdrawal for the 4th time. The last line was a date. Just a date. Nothing after it. He kept reading it as if more words would appear. They did not. The emergency session started at midnight and went until dawn. Nobody slept. Nobody left. 12 delegations sat around the great table under the pale chamber lights and tried to understand what had just happened. And by the time the artificial sky outside began cycling toward its morning setting, they had produced exactly 3 things. A list of possible reasons, an apology resolution, and a deepening fear that none of it was going to matter. The list of possible reasons was long. The border disputes humanity had been raising concerns about Yadari expansion in the outer territories for 6 years, and the Council had deferred a formal review each time. The trade quota system human commercial vessels had been operating under a Tier 2 access classification since the last restructuring, which meant longer transit windows and higher docking fees, and a sustained disadvantage that compounded across hundreds of ports. The colony vote 3 years ago, the Council had blocked a human request to establish a protected settlement zone in the Kareth Band, a vote that passed by a narrow margin and that the human delegation had, at the time, accepted quietly. Too quietly, as it turned out. Veth argued that the border disputes were the core of it. He was convincing. He had spent 6 years being the reason the border review kept getting deferred, and he knew the details better than anyone. The Sulhari supported him because they supported Veth on almost everything, and because the border disputes were simpler to talk about than the other things. Olaun said nothing for the first 4 hours. He sat in his chair, his data pad flat on the table in front of him, and he read. Not the debate around him. The document, the 17-page notice, and behind it, through his own private channels, everything he could pull about human trade patterns, logistics contracts, and diplomatic agreements filed over the past decade. There was a great deal to read. The apology resolution came together just before dawn. It was a strong, one direct acknowledgement of the deferred border review, a commitment to fast-track the quota restructuring, an expression of institutional regret for the colony vote outcome. Several delegations argued about the precise wording for 90 minutes. The final version was, by council standards, unusually clear. Veth pushed for it. He was certain it would work. Humans had been asking for exactly these things. Here they were, finally, on the table. The resolution passed unanimously. The transmission went out to the Human Diplomatic Office at 6 a.m. station time. At 6:14, the Human Diplomatic Office sent an acknowledgement. One line. Humanity appreciates the Council's communication. The notice of withdrawal remains in effect. Veth read it twice. Then he read it again. He was looking for the opening, the place where humanity was beginning a negotiation, using the withdrawal as leverage to extract better terms. That was the play. It was a known play. Species had done versions of it before. You threaten to leave. The other side panics. You settle for more than you would have gotten otherwise. It was smart. It was reasonable. He understood it. He could not find the opening because there was no opening. This was not a negotiation. Across the table, first speaker Olan finally set down his data pad. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at the ceiling. Then he said, quietly, to the analyst sitting behind him, a young Treth woman named Sale, who was very good at numbers. Pull the full human logistics map, not the council-registered routes. All of it. Sale looked at him. That data isn't consolidated anywhere. Then build it, Olan said. Use the trade filings, the port records, the maintenance contracts, everything that touched a human firm in the last 15 years. Map it. She started working. It took her 6 hours. Olan sat alone with the results and felt something he had not felt in many years. The map was not what he expected. He had expected to see human trade presence significant. Yes, valuable, certainly, but concentrated in the familiar corridors, the established lanes, the places where human commercial activity was visible and well known. He had expected something he could quantify and reassure himself about. The map did not look like that. The map looked like a nervous system. Human logistics infrastructure ran everywhere, not loudly, not with flags or branding or obvious markers. It ran underneath. Maintenance contracts on relay stations that kept communication networks functional across 6 council-member territories. Navigational data-sharing agreements, quietly renewed, cycle after cycle, that small vessel operators across a dozen species depended on without ever thinking about where the data came from. Supply chain arrangements so deeply embedded in the day-to-day operations of council-member economies that they had stopped being visible. They were just the way things worked. Nobody had mapped it. Nobody had thought to. Why would you map the floor under your feet? Sael ran the dependency calculation. She ran it twice, because the first result seemed wrong. It was not wrong. She walked to Olan's side of the table and put a single number in front of him. Baffinger Loschutzi. 67% of council-member economies had what she classified as critical dependency on at least one human-maintained logistics corridor. Critical meant disruption would produce measurable economic damage within 90 days. Not inconvenience. Not friction. Damage. And that was just the logistics. It did not account for the information-sharing protocols, the neutral arbitration services, the 17 ongoing infrastructure projects in various stages of completion, where human contractors were the primary operators, the navigational relay network that 3 separate council members used for their colonial transit lanes. None of that was in the 67%. Olaun sat with the number for a long time. In the main chamber, Veth was composing a second communication to the Human Diplomatic Office. He had decided the first apology had not been personal enough. He was going to request a direct meeting. He was going to bring the full apology resolution in hard copy, signed by every council member. He was going to make it clear that the council understood its mistakes and was prepared to make them right. He was still thinking about the border disputes. He was still looking at the part of the picture that was visible. Olan stood. He did not go back to the main chamber. He went to his private office, locked the door, and opened a channel to his own government's economics division. He needed their people to verify sales numbers. Not because he doubted her, because he needed someone else to see what he was seeing, so he would know he had not made an error. He had not made an error. He sat back in his chair and thought about Director Hana Yoon, a name that had appeared, briefly, in 3 separate human trade filings from different years. A name with no council profile, no diplomatic registry entry, no public record of any kind, beyond those 3 small appearances buried in routine paperwork. He had not thought anything of it at the time. He thought a great deal about it now. Outside, through his office window, the council station hummed along as it always did. Ships docking and departing, commerce and diplomacy, and the ordinary motion of a galactic civilization running on infrastructure that everyone used and no one thought about. The 67% sat on his desk. He stared at it the way Veth had stared at that last line of the withdrawal notice, waiting for it to mean something different. It did not. The first delegation arrived on day 4. 3 members of the Yadari diplomatic bloc, led by a senior envoy named Seth, who had a long career and a confident handshake, and a list of concessions that Veth had spent 2 days assembling. The list was good. Veth knew what humans wanted. He had been watching them want it for years. The border review, fully expedited. The trade quota redesign, with human vessels moved to Tier 1 classification immediately. A formal apology, read aloud at the next full council session, entered into the permanent record. These were real things, meaningful things. Things the human delegation had raised and been denied, and raised again for the better part of a decade. Seth arrived at the human diplomatic office with all of it prepared. Sarah Voss met him in the reception room. The room was comfortable. She had good tea, a dark, slightly smoky variety that Seth had encountered once before and found excellent. She poured it herself. She sat across from him, and she listened. Completely. She did not check her data pad. She did not look at the window. She gave him her full attention, and when he finished presenting the offer, she was quiet for a moment, in the way that made people feel they had been genuinely heard. Then she said, "Humanity appreciates the Yadari bloc's effort in preparing this. The notice stands." Seth blinked. "Ambassador, these are the terms your delegation has been requesting." "They are," Sarah said. "Yes." "Then, the notice stands." She refilled his tea. She asked about his journey to the station. She was warm and present, and entirely immovable. And Seth left 40 minutes later, with the distinct feeling of a man who had pushed against something and found it had no give at all, not because it was rigid, but because it simply was not a wall. There was nothing to push against. There was just a door that was already closed. The second delegation came on day 9, Sulhari. This time, with a different approach. Less about concessions, more about the relationship, the history between their species and humanity, the shared projects, the things built together over 200 years of coexistence. It was a warmer presentation, more personal. The lead envoy, a woman named Pyrrha, was good at this. She genuinely liked humans. That came through. Sarah gave her the full attention, the good tea, the warmth in return. When Pyrrha finished, Sarah said, "Humanity values everything you've described. The notice stands." Pyrrha tried twice more from different angles. The notice stood. On day 14, Udo Marsh issued a brief public statement from the Human Secretary General's office. It ran 2 paragraphs. It thanked council member states for their communications. It confirmed the withdrawal timeline. It wished all parties well. The galaxy's news networks ran it for about 6 hours, mostly with commentary asking what the real message was. What was humanity signaling? What did they actually want? What was the end game? Analysts offered 17 different interpretations. None of them said, "This is the message. There is no subtext. They are simply leaving." It did not occur to anyone to say that because it did not occur to anyone that it could be true. Meanwhile, on the human side of things, Udo Marsh had been moving through a checklist for 3 weeks. He was not a dramatic man. He was 54 years old, had been in the diplomatic corps for 30 of those years, and looked, as his deputy liked to say, like someone's accountant. He wore unremarkable clothes. He kept unremarkable hours. His office was tidy, without being sterile. He had a photograph of his 2 daughters on his desk, and a small cactus on his windowsill that he had owned for 12 years. He worked through the checklist the way he worked through all checklists, one item at a time. Embassy staff had been reassigned over the past month quietly, through routine transfer paperwork that generated no flags. Logistics routing updates had been filed under standard maintenance review classifications. Infrastructure transitions were being processed in batches, each one unremarkable on its own. The whole thing looked like ordinary housekeeping. That was the point. Hana Yun called him on day 16. She was somewhere that was not on any network map, Udo had learned not to ask exactly where. She looked tired in the way that people look when they have been working for a very long time and are almost finished. "Everything holds," she said. "How close?" he asked. "Close. The Kareth corridor transitions complete on day 26. After that, we're done." Udo nodded. He looked at his checklist. He made a small mark. "The third delegation comes day 18, he said. Hana almost smiled. "Let me guess. They're bringing the seat." He said nothing, which was its own answer. She closed the channel. The third delegation arrived on day 18. It was the largest one yet. 5 members, representing the Core Alliance, the most powerful voting bloc in the Council, the group that had controlled the institution's direction for longer than some species had been members. They arrived formally. They requested a formal meeting room, not the reception area. They brought documentation. Sarah Voss met them in the formal room. They presented their offer with care. The Core Alliance had debated it for 2 days. Some members had argued it gave away too much. Others had argued there was no choice. The final version represented the most significant concession the Council had offered any species in 40 years. A permanent human seat on the Galactic Council. Full standing. Veto rights on all primary resolutions, equal to the Core Alliance members themselves. Everything humanity had been formally requesting since the first year of their Council membership. Everything that had been denied, deferred, voted down, and politely set aside for 4 decades. Sarah received the documentation. She read it fully, carefully, without rushing. The delegation waited. They had prepared for negotiation. They were ready to discuss implementation timelines, transition procedures, the formal ceremony of it. Sarah set the document down on the table. She looked at it for a moment. Not with contempt, not with triumph. Just a long, quiet look. The way you look at something that has arrived too late to be what it was supposed to be. "That offer was worth making in 2031, she said. "It's 2071 now." She pushed the document back across the table, gently, with both hands. Humanity appreciates the Council's offer. The notice stands. The lead envoy, a man named Vorath, who had been in diplomacy longer than Sarah had been alive, looked at the document sitting in front of him. He had believed, until this moment, that this offer was the key, that there was a lock it fit, that all of this had been leverage, pressure applied until the right door opened. He understood, looking at Sarah's face, that he had misidentified the door. There was no door. There was just a countdown. He reported back to the Council that evening. The chamber went quiet in a way that Veth later described as the loudest silence he had ever heard. Olan sat in his chair and said nothing. He had already known. He had known since Sael put the number on his desk. Outside, the clock ran toward 30 days. Hana Yun's teams worked through the night. Everything was almost ready. The deadline passed at midnight. No announcement, no ceremony, no final statement from the human diplomatic office. The lights in the human embassy on the Council station simply went off. Not cut, not severed, just off. The way lights go off when everyone has already gone home. The building had been sold 3 weeks prior to a commercial property firm. The transaction had been filed under routine asset transfer and flagged by exactly no one. By morning, the station's maintenance crews were already receiving calls about the lobby signage. Inside the Council chamber, Veth had been awake for 26 hours. He had been certain, completely, professionally certain, that the notice was a negotiating tool and that something would break before midnight. An internal debate inside the human government, perhaps. Political pressure from human commercial interests who stood to lose from withdrawal. A last-minute back-channel reach-out through some quiet contact. He had people watching for it. Nothing broke. The clock hit midnight. The notice expired. The humans were gone. Veth sat in the chamber and waited for what came next. In his experience, when a species made a drastic move, the aftermath was loud. Declarations, countermoves, demands. The machinery of political crisis, which was something he understood and could operate within. What came instead was quiet. Not peaceful quiet. The other kind. The kind that fills in where something used to be. The first report arrived at 9 in the morning. A Sulhari commercial fleet operator, running a standard cargo route through the Meth corridor, had submitted a distress flag, not an emergency, not an attack, just a flag. The navigational relay station at the corridor's midpoint was running on outdated charts. The station operator had been running on a human data sharing agreement that had, as of midnight, expired. The charts were 14 months old. In a high-traffic corridor, 14-month-old charts were manageable, but uncomfortable. The kind of thing that slowed ships and raised insurance costs and created paperwork. The Council's infrastructure office logged it, routine. At 11, a second report. A border mediation process between two small council members, the Teth and the Nori. A long-running territorial dispute that had been grinding through arbitration had suspended proceedings. The neutral arbitration firm overseeing the process was a human firm. Their contract had expired at midnight. Both sides had assumed the contract would roll over automatically, the way it had for 11 years. It did not roll over automatically. There was no one to call. The infrastructure office logged it, still routine. By afternoon, there were 9 reports. An atmospheric processing station in the outer Yadari territories was flagging a maintenance cycle overdue. The specialist contractor responsible for the service interval was a human firm operating under a long-term service agreement. Expired at midnight. The station would hold for another 3 months without service. But after that, the processing efficiency would begin to degrade. 2 information-sharing protocols covering deep space navigation data in the Karath region had lapsed. 6 different council member vessel operators used the data. All 6 had filed queries about the renewal process. There was no renewal process. The data had not been council property. It had been human property, shared under agreement. The agreement was over. A human engineering consortium had been the primary contractor on a transit hub under construction in Treth space, 40% complete. The consortium's workers had begun an orderly departure from the site 2 weeks ago under the terms of their contract's withdrawal clause. Work had stopped. The site was secure. There was simply no one building it anymore. Each item, alone, was manageable. Frustrating, costly, disruptive, but manageable. Olan had been counting them since noon. He was not looking at each item. He was looking at what they added up to. He requested an emergency session at 3 in the afternoon. He asked the council to convene specifically on the topic of infrastructure dependency, not the political situation, not the diplomatic response, not the path back to the table, just the infrastructure, just the practical question of what the council needed to address immediately. He was voted down. The majority position was that the infrastructure disruptions were a side effect of a political situation, and the political situation needed to be addressed first. Once humanity returned to the table, and they would return, because of course they would return. This was still leverage. This was still a position. This was still something that could be resolved through the correct application of the correct offer. The infrastructure issues would resolve themselves. Veth led the majority. He was already drafting a 4th communication to the human diplomatic office. Olan sat in his chair and did not argue further. He had made his case. He had been overruled. He went back to his office and kept counting. At 7 in the evening, the report came in that changed the quality of the quiet. A Yadari colony ship, the Times Veth Radar, carrying 412 colonists to a settlement in the outer territories, had dropped out of its planned route and issued a navigational distress call. Not a collision, not a mechanical failure. The ship's guidance system had been routing through a relay network in the outer Veth corridor. The relay network had been maintained under a multi-year service contract by a human logistics firm. The contract had included an automatic fail-safe protocol, a kind of navigational safety net that kept ships from drifting off established paths in a region with poor natural landmark coverage. The fail-safe had been human software, running on human servers, renewed annually under the contract. At midnight, the servers had gone offline. The Times Veth Radar Times was not in danger. It had its own navigation systems. The crew was competent. They had pulled up manual charts and were recalculating their route. It would cost them 11 hours. The 412 colonists on board were fine, but the ship bore Councillor Veth's family name. Everyone in the chamber knew that. Old Yadari naming tradition, the colony ship named for the family that had sponsored the colonial mission. Veth read the report and sat very still. He was a skilled diplomat. He was not a man who showed his feelings in a meeting. But the people who knew him well, and Olan had known him for 20 years, could read the particular stillness that settled over him when something had reached through all the professional distance and landed somewhere. Personnel. Olan watched him read the report. He watched the stillness. He thought about Hana Yun. He thought about the name he had found in 3 separate trade filings. He thought about the navigational relay network, the service contracts, the fail-safe software. He thought about the timeline, how long it would have taken to put all of that in place, how many years of quiet work, how many decisions made in rooms that no council member had ever been invited to. He thought, they knew this ship's route. They knew every route. They had been the ones maintaining the network that all the routes ran through. The humans had not sabotaged anything. There was nothing malicious in any of this. The contracts had expired. The services had ended. Everything had been done correctly, legally, with full documentation and appropriate notice, buried in 17 pages of withdrawal paperwork that the council had been too panicked to read carefully. There was no attack to respond to, no aggression to condemn, no enemy to name, just an absence. And the shape the absence left behind. Veth set down the report. He looked across the table at Olan. Olan already had his coat on. He had been putting it on slowly, for the past hour, in the way of a man who has decided where he is going and is simply waiting for the right moment to stand up. You knew, Veth said. Not an accusation. Just a recognition. I knew enough, Olan said. Not all of it. Not the relay network. But enough. He stood. Where are you going? Olan picked up his bag. To ask someone the rest. He left the chamber. The door closed behind him. The colony ship was recalculating its route 11 hours behind schedule. The 412 colonists patient and unbothered while the crew did the work. In the chamber, Veth sat alone at the great table. The galactic civilization hummed around him. Ships and trade and communication, and all the ordinary motion of 1,000 species living their lives. He had not known, until today, how many of those motions ran on infrastructure that human hands had built, maintained, and quietly renewed year after year after year, infrastructure so embedded, it had become invisible, the way things always become invisible, when they work perfectly and never fail. He knew now. The knowing sat in his chest like a weight he hadn't been carrying a day ago. Olan arrived without an appointment. That alone was unusual. First speakers of the Treth Combine did not arrive anywhere without an appointment. The protocol machinery around a person of his rank was elaborate and slow-moving, the kind of institutional weight that made spontaneous travel feel vaguely illegal. It had taken him 4 hours to cut through enough of it to simply get on a ship. He had filed the travel under a personal health visit. His doctor on Treth Prime could be counted on to ask no questions, and Olaun's deputy could be counted on to ask the right ones, and then not ask them out loud. The human receiving station where he landed was smaller than he expected. Everything about it was smaller than he expected. After years inside the council station, a structure designed to impress by sheer scale, to make every visitor feel the weight of the institution they were entering, the human facility felt almost modest. Clean lines, good lighting, efficient without being cold. No one made him wait. That was also unusual. In his experience, making important visitors wait was a near-universal diplomatic custom, a small performance of leverage. Someone from his rank who had arrived without an appointment should have been left in a reception room for at least an hour to establish that they were the one who had come asking. Instead, a young human assistant met him at the dock, offered him water, and said, "Director Yun is ready for you." He followed the assistant through corridors that were calm and unhurried. Staff moved around him with purpose, but without performance. No one turned to look at him. No one adjusted their posture or lowered their voice when he passed. He was a first speaker, and nobody here appeared to care particularly. He found it, oddly, a relief. Director Hana Yun was waiting in a room that looked more like a working office than a meeting space. A wide desk covered in organized stacks. A wall of screens showing data feeds, logistics maps, transit figures, numbers he could not read quickly enough to interpret. A single large window, with a view of the station's exterior platform and, beyond it, open space. She stood when he entered. Average height. Mid-50s maybe. The kind of face that did not give much away without deciding to. She shook his hand with a firm grip and gestured to the chairs across from her desk. "First speaker," she said. "Thank you for coming in person." She poured tea without asking. The same dark, slightly smoky variety Seth had encountered in Sarah Voss's reception room 2 weeks and a lifetime ago. Olan realized, taking the cup, that this might be a human thing, not a specific diplomatic choice, just the kind of tea they kept. He found that thought grounding, somehow. A small, ordinary thing. He set the cup down and looked at her directly. "I'm not here to make another offer," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm here because I've been counting," he said. Infrastructure failures. Service contract expirations. Relay networks. Navigational data. Arbitration services. Construction projects. I've been counting for 3 days, and I haven't found the bottom of the list. He paused. "I need to understand the shape of what you built." Hana-Yun looked at him for a moment, not measuring him, exactly. More like confirming something she had already decided. "How much do you want to know?" she asked. "All of it," he said. She told him. Not everything there were parts of it that were not hers to share. Parts that would become clear in their own time. But the outline. The architecture. It had started 40 years ago, she told him. Not as a plan for withdrawal. As something simpler. A recognition, by a small group of human economists and logistics engineers, that humanity's position in the galaxy was structurally weak. Not militarily, humanity had no particular interest in military strength, economically, politically. Humans sat at the council table, but did not control any of the table's foundational mechanics. The council could inconvenience humanity indefinitely. Deny the seat, defer the reviews, adjust the quotas. Nothing dramatic. Just friction, year after year, enough to keep humanity useful, but secondary. The group had asked a different question than the one the diplomats were asking. The diplomats were asking, how do we get a better seat at the table? The group asked, what would it mean to not need the table? The answer took 30 years to build. Service contracts, filed quietly through independent firms. Infrastructure projects, offered at competitive rates to council members who needed them, and asked no questions about who was providing them. Navigational data, shared generously under agreements that no one had any particular reason to scrutinize. Each piece was legitimate. Each piece was useful to whoever received it. Each piece also happened to run through human hands, on human servers, under human maintenance cycles. Year by year, the network grew, not loudly, not with announcements or branding or any visible signature that might cause someone to map it and understand what it was becoming. Just quietly, the way roots grow underground, out of sight, unremarkable, until the day you try to move the tree. Hana-Yun had run the network's final phase for the last decade. The council denied the permanent seat in 2031, Olan said. Yes, and that was when we started building the exit. He sat with that for a moment. The straightforwardness of it. No anger in the way she said it. No bitterness. Just a fact. Described in its correct sequence. You knew about the times, Veth Radar, he said. We knew about all the routes, she said. We maintained them. We didn't disable anything. We simply stopped renewing. The colony ship was 11 hours delayed, she said. No one was harmed. The crew was trained for exactly that kind of navigation correction. She looked at him steadily. We do not harm people. That was never part of this. He believed her. He found that he had believed her since she started speaking, which was its own kind of important information about her. So what comes next, he said. Not quite a question. Hana set down her cup and folded her hands on the desk. What came next, she explained, was not a return to the old arrangement. The old arrangement was over. What came next was a different structure, direct bilateral partnerships, species by species, on terms that humanity had spent years preparing. Logistics agreements, infrastructure access, data sharing, arbitration services, Everything the council had bundled together into one institutional package, disaggregated, and offered individually, directly, without intermediaries. Species that wanted to work with humanity could do so. The terms were ready. The infrastructure already existed to support them. It was the same infrastructure that had always existed, simply operating under a different flag now. The council could participate. Member species could engage with humanity directly. The institution itself was welcome to find a new role in whatever arrangement emerged. Or not. You're not asking us to dissolve the council, Olaun said. No, she said. That's not our concern. The council can be whatever its members need it to be. But it can't be the hub, he said. Not anymore. It was never the hub, Hannah said. It thought it was. That's different. Olaun looked at the wall of screens behind her. The logistics maps. The transit lines running in every direction through space. He had spent his entire career thinking he understood. He had one more question. He had been carrying it since the chamber. Since Sael's number. Since the coat. Since the ship to human space. He had been saving it. The way you save a question when you are not sure you want the answer, but know you are going to ask it anyway. How long? He said. How long have you been building this? Hannah Yun picked up her tea. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at him. Since the first time you denied the seat, she said. The room was quiet. Outside the window, ships moved across the dark in orderly lines along corridors that had been planned and built and maintained by hands that no one had thought to notice until they were gone. Olaun stood, eventually. He thanked her for the tea. She walked him to the door. They shook hands again with the same firm, businesslike grip. Two people who understood each other now in a way that had not been possible that morning. He walked back through the calm corridors, past the staff who did not look up, to the dock where his ship was waiting. He did not contact the council immediately. He sat in the cockpit as the station fell away behind him, and the dark opened up ahead. He sat there for a long time, thinking about 40 years. Thinking about a small group of people who had asked the right question at the right moment, and then spent 4 decades quietly answering it, while everyone else argued about the seating arrangements. Thinking about how the most powerful thing in the galaxy had turned out to be patience. The stars looked the same as they always had. They always would. What was different was that he finally understood whose hands had built the lanes between them. He opened a channel to his deputy. Prepare a full briefing for the council, he said. Everything I've learned. All of it. A pause. How bad is it? He looked out at the stars. It's not bad, he said. It's just true. There's a difference. He closed the channel. The ship moved on through corridors that had always been there, maintained by hands that had always been there, running on patience that had been accumulating since before most of the council's current members had taken their seats. 40 years. He thought about that the whole way home.